Those of you visiting with us, we're just delighted that you've chosen to come our way. You're a blessing to us, and we trust that we shall be to you as we worship God in spirit and in truth for just a few moments this morning. Invite you to come back tonight at 5 o'clock. If you are in our area, we will be assembling again to worship God. Love to have you be a part of us. You know the text that Levi read, you've done a good job. Appreciate that. What God is doing in this passage and in several passages in the book of Exodus is He's actually trying to get the attention of Egypt. Attention Egypt. God is trying to get not just Egypt's attention, He's trying to get Pharaoh, who is king in Egypt. And by the way, Pharaoh is not the man's name. That's his title. Pharaoh is sort of like a czar or sort of like a Caesar. It's a title. So Pharaoh, or king in Egypt, needed to have his attention gotten. Because you go back to chapter 5 and verse 1, you find that Moses is sent to Pharaoh, and he tells Pharaoh, I've got a message to you, for you from God, and that is, let my people go. Now they may go into the wilderness and they may worship me. They've been slaves in Egypt for more than 400 years. But that doesn't get the attention of Pharaoh. So what God does then is send 10 plagues upon Egypt. And the first plague, of course, was the plague of the Nile River and all the waters turning to blood. And from that time on and subsequent plagues, God is trying to get the attention of Pharaoh. Let my people go. I'm serious about this. And then you get to the 10th plague when there is then the death of the firstborn throughout Egypt of all the Egyptians. Then God finally got Pharaoh's attention, and he let Moses and the people go. Now the second plague, and this is the one that Levi read for us from Exodus chapter 8. The second plague is the plague of frogs. When frogs then were released out of the Nile and they came up onto the land and they went into every place. They went into the bedchambers. They went into the kitchen. They went wherever, the kneading bowls, wherever people were, there were frogs all over the place. And I'll get to that more in just a moment. But you know, there's some things about the plagues that occurred in Egypt that have always fascinated me, and I've often wondered some things about those plagues. Now, I don't know about you. I think sometimes, the commercials sort of describe me. I have an inquiring mind. There are things that I look at and that I wonder about. And you may think, well, now, JR, probably some of these things are none of your business, and with that, I might agree. But nevertheless, I've often wondered when it comes to some of these plagues. Haven't you? You know, we read about the 10 plagues, and I've wondered how long a time period was involved. Is this something that just happened over and over and over, and then in 2 or 3 or 10 days it was all over? Or is this something that went on for a year, maybe 2 years? How long a time was it? Is this not something that interests you? It does me. And then I look at the plagues and I wonder, how in the world were the magicians able to duplicate some of those plagues? You know, you read in Exodus 7, and the first plague, the Nile turning to blood, the waters turning to blood in Egypt, and the Bible says that the magicians of Pharaoh's court were able to do the same thing. And you wonder about that? And the same was the frogs. When all the frogs came up out of the Nile, when Aaron stretched out his rod, the magicians in the court of Pharaoh, they were able to duplicate that. How did they do that? Was this some power that they had, or was it trickery? These are things that interest me. The Bible doesn't tell us. But nevertheless, these are things that cause us to wonder. And why in the world did Pharaoh keep changing his mind? You know, after each plague, when the plague was removed, Pharaoh said, well, if you remove the plague, I'll let the people go. And Pharaoh then would change his mind. He would back out, such as in the plague of the frogs. When Pharaoh saw that there was relief, or God removed the frogs, he changed his mind. He hardened his heart and did not heed them, as the Lord had said. Why in the world would he keep changing his mind? Back in chapter 7 in verse 22, or verse 23 rather, it says, neither was his, that is Pharaoh's heart, moved by all these things. Why? Saw plague after plague, made a promise to God, and then changed his mind. Doesn't that interest you? Why did he do that? But of all the things that interest me about the plague, I think there's something that's said in the verses that we read a few moments ago from Exodus chapter 8, especially in verse 10, that truly interests me. When God called Moses and told him, okay, you remove the plagues. Ask God to remove the plagues. And Moses said to him, well, when do you want me to ask God to remove these plagues? And Pharaoh said, well, how about tomorrow? Why in the world would he wait 24 hours to have all of these frogs removed from the land of Egypt? I find that to be extremely interesting. When do you want me to ask God to take all of these frogs away from you, to get them out of your kitchen and out of your bedroom and out of your kneading bowl? When do you want me to ask God? You know, anybody, or at least it seems to me, any man or woman in his or her right mind would say, hey, how about right now? How about immediately? Hey, let's get this done right on the spot, right away, quickly, pronto, let's do it. But that's not what Pharaoh said. Pharaoh said, you know what, it'll be all right if we do this tomorrow. Well, why don't you just remove all of these plagues tomorrow? Or all these frogs tomorrow? I don't know about you, but isn't that strange? Isn't that the strangest thing that you would ever think about reading? Just, do this tomorrow. Well, I want to talk about that. But before I do, I want to remind us of some things. I want to be reminded of what these plagues represented, not only in trying to get Egypt's attention, but what they represented as far as the Egyptians themselves were concerned with when it came to the deities that they worshiped. Every plague that was brought upon Egypt in some way or another affected their gods. For example, when the Nile River turned to blood, that was a direct attack upon the god of the Nile, Hepa. That was the god of the Nile, and when the Nile turned to blood, that was an attack upon that god. When the sun was darkened and there was darkness over the land, that was a direct attack upon the god of the sun, the god of the sun, god of the sun. And so all of these were attacks upon those gods. And the same is true when it came to the attack upon the plague of frogs. That was an attack upon Heket, who was a goddess of fertility, and she was represented either as a frog or as a woman with the head of a frog. Now, the Egyptologists tell us that she was the goddess of childbirth and fertility. And by the way, as a matter of fact, her priestesses were midwives. You remember what happened over in Exodus chapter 1, when the midwives were told to kill all of the male babies of the Hebrews that were born. These midwives would have been priestesses of Heket, this frog-like woman who was a goddess in Egypt. And the frog, as is indicated here, was considered to be a theophany, that is the appearance of the goddess. So when you saw a frog, insofar as the Egyptian mind was concerned, you saw this goddess. And so when the Nile gave up all of the frogs and frogs came up on the land, this would have been an attack upon this goddess of fertility. Now, in order to get a visual of what the Egyptians would have looked at with this plague of frogs, let's just kind of think about what they would get up and say. I mean, hey, just frogs were everywhere. These slimy, smelly, disgusting, repulsive amphibians were just everywhere in Egypt. wherever they would walk. You'd have big frogs, you'd have little frogs, you'd have ugly frogs, and I don't know if there's any pretty frogs, but these might be, little tree frogs might be considered cute, but they'd be in your drinking water. You'd walk outside, they'd be in your yard. Everywhere you would go, there would be frogs, even in your bed. And so Moses is asked by Pharaoh, will you remove these frogs? Will you have these frogs taken away from us? And Moses said, yeah, when do you want them to go? And he said, tomorrow. Is that what you'd say? What would you say? What would be your answer? If you were Pharaoh and you had the power to have them removed pronto, what would you say? Would you say, let's do this tomorrow? Now, let's go back to the initial question that we asked. Why did Pharaoh delay until tomorrow? Now, we're not told, but I think there are some things that we can learn by just examining Pharaoh and some of the things that occurred in his life and in his dealings with Moses and with Aaron. But one of the things that I come away recognizing is that here was a man, Pharaoh, who had absolutely no concern for his people. He had no concern for the Egyptians at all. Now, he was the leader of the people, but I'm going to tell you, here is a man who, these frogs would have not just been in his house, they would have been in the houses of all the people. And not just Pharaoh would have had to live with the frogs overnight, but all of the people would have to have lived with the frogs overnight. And so here's a man who doesn't care. Every decision that he makes that may affect somebody else, he doesn't care about that somebody else. Now, I'm going to tell you there's some lessons in that. We sometimes think that what we do is our own business, and it doesn't affect anybody else. What I do is my own business. You talk, hey, you just judge yourself. I'm okay. What I do is my business, and the choices that I make, they don't affect anybody else. But that's wrong. Here he made a choice to keep the frogs overnight, and that's something that affected everybody in his kingdom. We talked about it in class a little bit this morning when we talked about what Achan did. Achan made a choice to rebel against God, and it affected 38 families. There are 36 families, rather, lost a loved one. They died. So that's a decision that a man made that affected somebody. Oh, by the way, it affected his own family. All of his children, grandchildren, in-laws, they all were stoned. So what a person does affects other people. What David did in 2 Samuel chapter 11 in his sin with Bathsheba, that affected everybody. It affected Uriah, the husband of Bathsheba. It affected the child that was conceived in that illicit relationship. He died. It affected the family of David. The sword did not depart from the house of David. It affected the kingdom of Israel. So what we do, parents, you need to learn that the choices that you're making while your children are toddlers or while they're in your household, that's going to redound upon decisions that they make later on. The faith that you have or the weakness that you display may well be the faith they have or the weakness they display. And you know what? You're not going to realize that until they get to be about 18, 19, or 20 years old, and suddenly you see they're bearing your characteristics. Then it's too late. So the decisions that we make affect other people. He wasn't thinking of other people. He wasn't concerned about his people. We'll just do this tomorrow. What could it be that he thought that God would change his mind and that God would remove the frogs without there being any conditions? Maybe God will just remove these on his own and I won't have to let the people go. He realized the magicians couldn't make the frogs disappear or he would have consulted them. It's only God who is able to take care of getting rid of the frogs. And maybe, if I just wait 24 hours, maybe God will change His mind and just remove them. Now, how many times do we think like that? How many times do we believe that God will make us the exception? I can be the exception to God's commands. I can be the exception to what God says. Yes, everybody else must do A, B, C, and D. Hey, but not me. I'm the exception. This may apply to this person. This may apply to that person. But hey, it doesn't apply to me. You see, that's somewhat the attitude that it seems that Pharaoh was displaying at this time. Hey, it just doesn't apply to me. Can I use Achan again as an illustration in Joshua chapter 6? God said, do not take of any of the spoils. Well, that may apply to this family, that may apply to that. That doesn't apply to old Achan here. But yes, it did. No one is exempt from the commands of God. No one is exempt from what God's Word reveals. Nobody. I'll tell you something else that may have played a part in this. It could have been the unmistakable arrogance that this man had. And indeed, he was indeed arrogant. As egotistical is the word that I might throw out here to describe him. No shepherd is going to come into my palace and tell me what to do. You're telling me to let all of this free labor leave? Wrong. Not going to happen. As a matter of fact, this man was so arrogant, he wouldn't let God tell him what to do. Remember in Exodus chapter 5 and verse 2, when Moses came in and said, have got a message from God, God said to let my people go. And you know what Pharaoh's response was? Who is the Lord that I should obey His voice? I don't know the Lord. Oh, hey, God's not going to tell me what to do. Nobody's going to come in here and demand something out of me. And he'd rather sleep another night in a bedchamber full of frogs than to repent of his self-importance. You know anybody like that? You know anybody so arrogant and so disgustingly egotistical that they'll just stand up and say no to God? Nobody's going to tell me what. That preacher's not going to tell me what to do. You know, I find that sometimes, when preachers talk about the subject of giving. You preach on the contribution, which is a command from God. And so many people have the attitude, that guy's not going to tell me what to do, and so the next week the contribution goes down. That's an attitude that Pharaoh has, You're going to tell me that I have to be there on Sunday night? I'm not. I'll show you. And see, here's it. Moses comes in. God says, let him go. Not going to do it. Not going to do it at all. And in addition to that, I think we have to conclude that he was an extremely stubborn and hardened man. How many times does the Bible say that he hardened his heart and did not listen to God over and over again, even in the context of the frogs? Verse 15, Pharaoh saw that there was relief. He what? He hardened his heart and did not heed them. The same is true in chapter 7, verses 22 and 23. Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them. You see, he became accustomed to saying no to God. He became accustomed to defying God. And every time that he defied God, and each time that he said no to God, you know what was happening? His heart was growing a little harder. And you know what? We don't use that term hardened heart much anymore. We use the term stubborn. He became stubborn. There's nothing. There's absolutely nothing that is redeeming about the attitude of stubbornness. That's not a redeeming quality. Pharaoh was an extremely stubborn man. And as a result of that, he was not about to relent to what God said. He was not about to give in, even when it came to the point of losing his son. In Exodus chapter 13 and verse 15, the writer says that it came to pass, when Pharaoh was stubborn about letting us go, that the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Now that's what stubbornness will do. There are consequences to this. You know, Hosea chapter 4 and verse 16 talks about Israel. Israel has become like a stubborn calf. You know, I got to tell you, I used to think, and, you know, we'd often say, to folks, you need to be open-minded. You just need to read the Bible with an open mind. What we're saying to people is, let's not be stubborn. Let's be open and malleable, pliable. Let's just be reasonable when it comes to the Word of God. Let's lay aside any stubbornness. And you know, I used to mistakenly believe that was an ungodly trait that existed only among sectarians, but I find that's not the case. I find that there are a lot of professed Christians that are as stubborn as anybody in the denominational world, and maybe more so. And you know, I got to tell you, if that's the attitude that we have, if the attitude of stubbornness is one that is manifested in us, then if we were ever involved in error, we would never come out, because we're just too stubborn. And this is the way that Pharaoh was. He was just simply a stubborn man. And when we look at Pharaoh and we see how foolish his decision was, we just scratch our head. How can a man be that way? How can you have a man so stinking stubborn that he wouldn't even have the frogs removed that day? He wanted to wait till tomorrow. But let me ask you this. Whenever we examine the case of Pharaoh and we see how stubborn he was and how that he wanted to spend another night with the frogs, do we see ourselves? Are we able to take a good, solid look in the mirror at how many things we want to put off until tomorrow? No, it may not be getting rid of frogs, but I'm telling you, there are a lot of things that we want to put off till tomorrow. I'll get it done. I'll do it tomorrow. I know it's something that I need to take care of, and I'm going to get around to that, but I'm not going to get around to it till tomorrow. But I'm going to tell you something. Just like with Pharaoh, tomorrow is elusive. All we have is today. But most of us are exactly like Pharaoh. Let me give you some examples here. Let's think about that habit that we have. That's unpleasant, ungodly, it stinks, it destroys, it enslaves, and we look at ourselves in the mirror and we say, you know what, I'm going to break this habit. But you know, I think I'll do it. I think I'll do it New Year's Day. I think I'll wait to the first. This will be my New Year's resolution. I'll break that habit or tomorrow. You know, it may be a tobacco habit. Maybe I'm a smoker, and I've got a pack of cigarettes, and I've got 17 cigarettes left in the package, and I say, well, you know what? Just as soon as this pack of cigarettes is empty, I'm done. That's the attitude of Pharaoh. I'll do this. I'll do it tomorrow. Let's get rid of the frogs, but let's do it. Let's do it tomorrow. Yeah, I'm going to break this habit. I'm going to break my tobacco habit. I'm going to break my language habit. I'm going to break all of these other bad habits that I have. But you know what? I think tomorrow's when I'll do that. I'll just break them tomorrow. Can't get around to it today. But I'm going to tell you, listen to me. I understand. I understand how difficult change is. I understand how frightening it is. I understand how uncomfortable it is. Somebody described change one time as being as uncomfortable as a brand new pair of blue jeans. Now, I'm not talking about the kinds that got holes in them, look like they've been washed, 47 times down at the creek. Also, I'm talking about these old stiff blue jeans you used to get. You got to put them on, they're kind of uncomfortable. You got to break them in. And that's the way it is with change. That's the way it is with breaking habits. Yes, it's going to involve a period of difficulty. It's going to involve some uncomfortable feelings that we have. But it's not something we should put off until tomorrow. It's something we need to accomplish now. Pharaoh, when do you want me to get these from? Tomorrow. Well, when are you going to break that habit? Tomorrow. I'll get around to it one of these days. You know, we better act right now. Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 1 says that we need to lay aside every sin and the weight that so easily ensnares us, or the sin that so easily ensnares us. We need to do it now. He didn't say, hey, you know what, think about it. You know, you do it sometime tomorrow. You do it now. Lay it aside right now. I can remember. A fellow gave me 5 little pigs one time. He wanted to get me in the pig business. I had 5 little pigs. And what he told me, I don't know. I'm not a pig farmer. I was a preacher, played at being a pig farmer. But he told me, he said, what we need to do is we need to cut these pigs' tails off. And I said, why do you want to cut the pig's tail off? He said, well, you know, sometimes they'll get to fighting and rooting around and said they'll gnaw one another's tails off. Now, I don't know if that's true. But that's what the man told me. So I acted upon that. I figured he's a pig farmer. He knows what he's talking about. So we had these little pigs. And he had a real sharp knife. And he got in there with them little pigs, and he'd grab that little pig's tail, and that little pig squealing and running this way, and he'd whack that tail off just like that. Little pig kind of squeal and drag on the ground a little bit, you know. I guess it hurt, and anything else you want to say. And I know we look at that and we think, well, you know, that's cruel. Well, it may be. I don't know. Well, I did it. I may need to repent of it, but I did it. but I'll tell you what would have been more cruel than that? What would have been more cruel than that is cutting off about 1/4 of an inch at a time until we got the whole thing cut off. It would hurt just as bad every time. That's the way it is with breaking habits. When I go about this in increments, a little at a time, I'm going to cut back, I'm going to cut back, I'm going to cut back. Hey, cut the tail off now. Yes, it hurts. Yes, it burns. Yes, it's uncomfortable. But it's folly to wait and drag this thing out, you see. But you see, when we talk about Pharaoh, we better look at ourselves. What about the things that I'm putting off until tomorrow? What about overcoming my mediocrity? I'll do that tomorrow. Yeah, you know what? I know that I ought to be more involved. I know that I ought to stop being a pew sitter. I know I ought to stop doing nothing, and I ought to really jump in with both feet and see what I can provide for the church. But you know what? I'll do this tomorrow. This is not a good time. I'd really like to enhance my study habits. You know what? I'm going to start reading my Bible every single day. Well, when are you going to do? I'll start tomorrow. And I know, like the Ecclesiastes writer said, whatever my hands finds to do, I need to do it with all of my might, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to get involved in visitation. I'm going to get involved in teaching. I'm going to get involved in doing things for other people. I'm going to get involved in teaching my neighbors the gospel of Christ. I'm going to be involved tomorrow. Yes, sir, Bob. I'll start that tomorrow. I'll get busy about that, and I'll do it tomorrow. I'm going to shake off my indifference. I'm going to shake off my passivity and my procrastination tomorrow. See, that's the attitude Pharaoh had. I'll do this tomorrow. And when we look at that, you know, yeah. I know I've got a temper problem. I know I fly off the handle. I know I'm a screamer. I know I'm a yeller. I know people hate to be around me when I am losing my temper. And I'm going to start controlling that tomorrow. I'm going to tell you, there's nothing virtuous, nothing godly about the lack of self-control. As a matter of fact, the lack of self-control is a work of the flesh. And self-control, on the other hand, is a fruit of the Spirit. And so I'm going to stop screaming and I'm going to stop lashing out in anger at my wife or my husband or my children or my neighbor or whomever. Tomorrow. It's just not convenient for me to do so right now. Can you think of anybody who said that in the Scriptures? You know, there's a person who said that very thing in the Scripture. You remember in Acts chapter 24 and verse 25 when Paul was preaching to Felix, he reasoned with Felix about righteousness, self-control. And what was it that Felix said? When I have a convenient time, I'll call for you. It's just not time. Tomorrow. But not now. See, we have to admit, there might be a little bit of Pharaoh in each of us. Oh, what about worry? You know, I tell you what, I know I need to stop worrying and I need to start trusting God. But you know, I've got to get these things worked out first. I'll do that tomorrow. I know I need to be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let my requests be made known to God. And I'm going to do that tomorrow. I can't get it done right now. I got too many issues, and so I'll just wait another night. So I'll spend another night, not with the frogs, but I'll spend another night lying there in the bed, sweating and worrying, unable to sleep. And I'll stop all of this tomorrow. Another day, I'll spend another day unable to function. Another day looking out the window. Another day looking at the television. Unable to go to work. Unable to accomplish anything. I'll put all of that behind me tomorrow. I will. Trust also in Him, Psalm 37 and verse 5, and He shall bring it to pass. And I'll do that tomorrow. I won't do it today. See, there's a little bit of Pharaoh in us. And I'm going to begin the reconciliation and the healing of broken relationships tomorrow. I'll make that phone call. I'll make that apology. But I'll do it tomorrow. I'll heal that broken relationship with family members or with brethren. I'll pursue peace with all men. But I'm going to start that tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm going to start overlooking a fault. Tomorrow I'm going to start offering forgiveness. Tomorrow I'm going to start reaching out and healing these broken relationships. Tomorrow I'm going to begin to allow love to cover a multitude of sins. But I just can't get over it right now. Now's not a good time. I'll take care of this tomorrow. I'll tell you something about that. Do you realize that broken relationships will short-circuit your relationship with God? Did you know that? So much so that Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount said, if you're about to go to the altar and offer a gift, and you remember that there is a conflict between you and your brother, leave that gift at the altar. Go make friends with your brother. Reconcile. Do it now, even before you offer worship to God. It's something that has to be done. It's not something we can put off until tomorrow. And even at home. Peter teaches in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7 that if there's a conflict between husbands and wives at home, you better get this taken care of because that short-circuits your prayers. Even your prayers are hindered, men. This is a serious matter. This is not something that we can just, kick the can down the road and put it off till tomorrow or next week. It's something that's got to be taken care of. God, you look at the case of Pharaoh. God will let stubbornness take you to hell. It destroyed Pharaoh. He ended up drowning in the Red Sea because he was stubborn. And I tell you, there are people that go to funerals and graveyards and look at the remains of a loved one that they've been estranged with from years and spend the rest of their life regretting, I wished I had called Mom and worked this out. I wish that we could have just got this worked out. Now there's nothing, and there isn't. anything that can be done. This is not something we put off. You know, so when we've got an estrangement in our lives, we need to take care of that. And we need to do it presently. We can't wait till tomorrow. And then, yeah, JR, one of these days I'm going to renounce this world of sin. I'm going to take up my cross and I'm going to follow Jesus. I'm going to become a Christian. Tomorrow. Not today. Let me ask you something. I want to just throw this question out at all. Have you ever, in your life, like Pharaoh, made a promise to God? Now just think, just stay with me on this. Have you ever, in a crisis, now that's what Pharaoh was in. He was in some serious crises here. You know, whether we're talking about the river or the rivers turning to blood, or we're talking about frogs all over the place, or we're talking about the death of cattle and flies and all of these other things that Pharaoh was encountering. Have you ever, in a crisis, made a promise to God? Let me give you some help. Remember when you were undergoing your lab work, when your health was bad? You remember what you said in prayer to God? Dear God, please, dear God, let these tests come back negative. And dear God, if you let these tests come back negative and there's nothing wrong with me, I promise you I'm going to. You ever made that promise to God? What about when the children were sick? And what about in the middle of the night when you were trying to get the fever down? That you prayed beside that bedside, dear God, please let him be all right. Dear God, please let him be okay. And God, if you will heal his little body, I promise you. And you know what those promises were? Dear God, let me get through this financial crisis. Let us get these things worked out, God. And please, if you do this, I promise you, I'm going to spend the rest of my life serving you. How many times have we made promises like that? And then how many times have we broken our word to God? How many times did God let the test results come back negative and then we forgot what we said to God? Or God healed that body of that child and we forgot the promise that we made to God? For the time that God got us through the financial crises, and then we just walk away from the promises that we made to God. Let me tell you something. Promises that are made in desperation, without any sincerity, is to look to tomorrow. I say it today, but I don't mean it until tomorrow. I tell you, those people who are like Pharaoh that neglect the mercy of God, I'm going to say something pretty harsh here. Those people who are like Pharaoh and they neglect the mercy of God deserve to have that mercy removed, as it was with Pharaoh. Proverbs 29:1, he who is often rebuked and hardens his neck will suddenly be cut off, and that without remedy. Let me close this evening by noting something that David wrote in the 39th Psalm. Because what David wrote in the 39th Psalm, I believe, is reflected in this chart. Your future is created by what you do today, not what you do tomorrow. David said in Psalm 39, while my heart was hot within me, while I was musing, the fire burned. David said, I began to look at my lot in life and I was disturbed. And then he said, then I spoke with my tongue, Lord, make me to know my end. And what is the measure of my days, that I may know how frail I am? Indeed, you have made my days as handbreadths, and my age is as nothing before you. Certainly every man at his best state is but a vapor. That's what James talks about. Our life is just a vapor. It appears for a little while, then it vanishes away. So in reality, There is no tomorrow. All we have is right now. Surely every man walks about like a shadow. Surely they busy themselves in vain. He heaps up riches and does not know who will gather them. After David examined his life, in view of the fact that his life was nothing but a vapor, he asked a very disturbing question in verse 7. He said, "And now, Lord, what do I wait for?" And that's a question we have to ask ourselves. If we're not right with God, God has allowed us in His mercy to live to this point in time, that we can examine our relationship to Him and we can make changes. Not tomorrow, for tomorrow is elusive, but today. So what are you waiting for? If you're not a Christian, what in the world are you waiting for? If you believe Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and you're willing to repent of your sins and confess Him as your Savior before men, and be baptized in water for the remission of your sins, you can be raised to walk in newness of life. What are you waiting for? Really, what are you waiting for? And my brother or my sister, if I have described the battles that you're having, the habits, the temper, the lack of self-control, if I've described it, don't wait till tomorrow to correct these things. You can do that right now. Maybe you would like to ask this congregation to pray for you, to help you. And we'll do that. We'll help you in any kind of way that we can. So what are you waiting for? Pharaoh said, I'll take care of this tomorrow. Well, you see what his tomorrow held. He was destroyed. And he destroyed a lot of his people along with him. Don't have the attitude that Pharaoh had and decide that you're going to spend another night in whatever sin, whatever temptation, whatever struggle that you're having. Don't spend another night there. The great physician is waiting to deliver you if you will but come. Why don't you do that? Well, together we stand as we sing.